Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the tactical mind of a competitive epee fencer. We're going to break down the art of the setup, and we're pulling back the curtain using the amazing insights from Coach Chuck Alexander of the No Fear Fencing Club. All right, let's kick things off with probably the most fundamental question any fencer can ask themselves when they step on that strip. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? But, the answer? It's the absolute key to taking your game to a whole new level. It's what separates just fencing from actually intentionally winning. So, what does it mean to act with intent? It means focusing on the setup. Look, a lightning-fast, perfectly executed lunge is awesome, but it's totally useless if your opponent isn't even there. The real magic, the real art, is in creating the opportunity for that lunge. It's about controlling the bout from your very first move, long before that final attack is even on the table.
Okay, so how do you actually build that intent? Where do you even start? Well, it begins with understanding the whole picture of what makes a competitive fencer, right from the ground up.
Think of it like building a house. The foundation, your absolute base, has to be physical fitness. Without that, the whole thing just crumbles. Then, on top of that, you start layering on the skills. Footwork to own the distance, then blade work for that pinpoint accuracy. But the real game-winning stuff, that happens way up at the top of this pyramid. And this pyramid, man, it just illustrates the point perfectly. See how every level depends on the one below it? You can't skip steps. Your physical skills are non-negotiable. But the bouts themselves, the touches that actually win you the match, they're won right there at the peak, with smart tactics and an even smarter strategy. So let's climb up to that peak and talk about the real mind game here. Because fencing, it's so much less about who has the fastest twitch reflexes and way, way more about psychology. Think about this. Every fencer out there, including your next opponent, is basically a bundle of habits. They've been conditioned by doing the same drills thousands and thousands of times. That parry four they always go for, that little counter to the hand, a lot of the time, that's not a conscious choice. It's just a reflex. It's pure Pavlov. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it totally flips the script on what a good habit even is. Think about it. If you're so consistent that your opponent knows exactly what you're going to do, well, your biggest strength just became your most massive liability. You've basically handed them the playbook on how to beat you. So your job, it's to become a detective on the strip. You've got to identify these patterns, these triggers. Does your opponent freak out and attack the second you step into their favorite distance? Do they have a go-to move when you make blade contact? Maybe they always fall back on defense when pressured. These aren't just little quirks. This is pure gold. It's intelligence you can use to set the perfect trap. Okay, so how do you do this detective work? How do you gather all this intel while you're in the middle of a bout? It's not just one thing. It's actually a dynamic three-part process that you've got to keep running in your head. So you've got two main tools here, observation and probing. And you need both. Observation is the passive part. It's just watching, seeing what your opponent does naturally, what their default settings are. But probing, that's the active part. That's when you poke the bear a little bit with a feint to see how they react under pressure. And these are your tells, just like in poker. You're constantly scanning. Watch their lead shoulder. That's your best indicator for distance. Their hand, that's the closest target, so see what they're doing with it. Check their knees to see how ready they are to spring into action, and their weight distribution tells you everything about where they're about to go. You run the scan over and over, and pretty soon, your subconscious starts picking up on patterns before you even consciously realize what's happening. Okay, this next point is absolutely critical. When you're probing with a feint, it has to look real. It has to feel like a genuine threat. If it's a lazy, half-hearted feint, your opponent's not going to give you a real reaction. And then all that data you think you just gathered, it's garbage. It's like running a scientific experiment with faulty equipment. So you're doing all this stuff, right? You're gathering data, you're scanning, you're analyzing. It sounds really complicated. But through it all, you have to remember the single most important rule in the book. And this is it. This is where it all comes together. The whole point of all this complicated observation, all this mental chess, is to boil it all down to one simple, decisive action. And here's a great little rule of thumb to keep in your back pocket. No matter the length of the bout, by the time you're about halfway through, so around the third touch in a 5-touch bout or the 8th in a 15, you should have enough information to have a solid game plan. You should have a pretty good idea of what's working and what's a total dead end. This is maybe the most important takeaway. You have to separate your thinking time from your doing time. All that heavy lifting, the diagnosing, the planning, the strategizing, that happens between halt and on guard. That's your time. But the second the ref says fence, your brain needs to go quiet. You should be focused on one thing and one thing only, executing the simple plan you've already decided on. But of course, we all know what happens to even the best laid plans, right? They can fall apart. And that brings us to this classic military quote that could have been written specifically for fencing. Now, the big misunderstanding here is that some people think this means don't bother planning. No, that's not it at all. What Molka was saying is you don't just create plan A, you create a system of plans. A whole bunch of if-then scenarios. So if my opponent does X, I do Y. That way, when they inevitably do something you didn't expect, you're not caught flat-footed. You just shift to the next expedient. You adapt. And that, ultimately, is what mastering the art of the setup is all about. It's about not just reacting to what's happening right now, it means you are actively creating the next touch, thinking 2, 3, even 4 moves ahead of your opponent. It's about turning fencing into physical chess. So the question is, are you thinking about your next move?